Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the fascinating, frustrating, and honestly hilarious contradiction that is Ross Geller. Look, if you've ever watched Friends and thought, man, Ross is brilliant and lovable, but he literally cannot handle his own emotions to save his life, well, you're absolutely right. You're not imagining it. So let's break down exactly why that is. It's such a great question, right? Why does the smartest person in the room act like the least mature? It really sits at the very heart of his character. On paper, Ross is, frankly, incredibly intelligent. I mean, the guy has a PhD, a super successful career, and this encyclopedic knowledge of dinosaurs. He can explain complex evolutionary theory without breaking a sweat. Yet, how can a brilliant scientist have such a remarkably hard time handling his own emotions? How does he end up acting like the least emotionally mature person in the room? Well, we're dealing with a massive gap. On one hand, you have intellectual intelligence. We're talking paleontology, getting that PhD, memorizing obscure facts. But on the other hand, you have emotional intelligence, and that is a completely different ballgame. Knowing what you feel is one thing, right? But actually accepting responsibility for it and realizing how it impacts others, that's another thing entirely. Understanding obscure science is a breeze for Ross, but understanding why someone is hurt by his behavior, yeah, that proves to be much, much harder. So to really get this, we need to quickly define emotional immaturity. For Ross, it essentially boils down to this: responding to what you're afraid might happen rather than what is actually happening. He doesn't always react to the reality of his relationships. Instead, he reacts to his own insecurities. He reacts to what he is terrified might go wrong. And honestly, this fundamental disconnect, it's the engine driving some of his most chaotic moments in the entire series. Section 1. The Jealousy Trap. How insecurity turns love into fear. Now, Ross genuinely loves Rachel. There is absolutely no denying that. But his insecurity often turns that genuine love into this paralyzing fear. Remember when Rachel gets that job at Ralph Lauren and starts working with Mark? Ross's insecurity totally grabs the steering wheel. Instead of trusting the woman he loves, he reacts to worst-case scenarios rather than actual evidence. Which, of course, inevitably leads us to, "We were on a break," literally the most famous line of the show. But here's the thing about this infamous argument. It isn't really about their relationship status. It's not about whether he technically had the right to consider himself single. What it actually reveals is his desperate need to prove his actions were technically justified. He gets so intensely focused on proving he's right that he completely avoids confronting the devastating emotional damage he just caused. When it comes to resolving conflicts, there are usually two paths you can take. An emotionally mature person focuses on connection. They say, "I understand by what I did hurt you." But Ross, he repeatedly defaults to defense mode. "But I was right." When he feels threatened or rejected, his absolute first instinct is to defend himself, rather than examine himself. His primary goal isn't to heal the rift, guys. His primary goal is just to win the argument. Which brings us to part 2. Relationships are not courtrooms. Finding technicalities. Welcome to the courtroom mindset. It's all about who was right, who was wrong, who technically did what first, who owes who an apology. Just think about Emily for a second. Emily is understandably hurt and distrustful after Ross literally says Rachel's name at the altar. I mean, wouldn't you be? But instead of just accepting her perfectly reasonable pain, Ross gets totally bogged down in this frantic checklist of fairness. He treats it like a legal battle. But relationships aren't courtrooms. Emotional maturity sometimes just means accepting that two people can both be hurt even when one person has a stronger factual argument. And you know, this courtroom mindset even bleeds into how he handles his own mistakes. Don't get me wrong, Ross is absolutely capable of apologizing, but he almost always uses his intellect as a shield. He tacks on these explanations that completely weaken the apology. Instead of simply saying, "I was wrong," he adds a "because" to explain exactly why he behaved that way or what the other person did first. Now, the explanation might even be factually true, but emotionally, it changes the whole message. It stops sounding like accountability, and it starts sounding exactly like self-defense. Part 3. The panic cycle, when emotions completely take the steering wheel. So what actually happens when logic disappears entirely? Think about the infamous leather pants incident, or, oh my gosh, his absolute rage over his missing Thanksgiving leftover sandwich. The humor in these scenes works so well precisely because we recognize a very specific, almost clinical pattern here. 1, something goes wrong. 2, he becomes immediately overwhelmed. 3, he frantically tries to control the situation. 4, that inevitably makes things worse. And 5, he completely loses it. The Thanksgiving sandwich is hilarious because at the end of the day, it's just a sandwich. But underneath the joke is a guy who just cannot regulate his anger when he feels something important has been taken from him. The reaction becomes massively disproportionate to the actual problem.
Part 4. The Roots of Insecurity, Where the Fear Begins.
Now, to be completely fair to Ross, his feelings aren't fake. And to truly understand him, we have to look at where this desperate need for certainty actually comes from. Ross desires reassurance because his insecurity is rooted in something very real. His deep-seated fear of abandonment started with some real trauma. Remember, his first marriage to Carol ended when she realized she was attracted to women and fell in love with Susan. Ross was deeply, profoundly hurt by that. So later on, when Rachel gets a job with Mark or when his wedding to Emily turns into a total disaster, his fear of losing someone he loves repeatedly drives his behavior. He reacts defensively to any future emotional uncertainty because, well, he knows exactly how much it hurts to lose.
Part 5. The Reality of Emotional Growth, Learning and Reflecting.
Ultimately, Ross isn't a villain. He's not even uniquely terrible at relationships compared to the rest of the world. He's just a deeply flawed person trying to figure out how to navigate a totally unpredictable world, and he often reacts to that emotional uncertainty with defensiveness instead of reflection. But across 10 seasons of failed marriages, professional setbacks, and friendship conflicts, we learned something important. His biggest problem was never feeling too much. His emotions were never the issue. The issue was this massive gap, the gap between feeling a very strong emotion and actually knowing what to do with it. Growing up emotionally isn't about never getting jealous or angry. It's about getting better at recognizing those emotions before they control your actions. And this right here is why his character is so universally relatable to all of us. Because let's be honest, we don't struggle with emotional maturity when everything is going great. We struggle when things get tough. We struggle when we feel threatened, when we're jealous, when we're embarrassed, when someone we love might leave us, or when we genuinely believe we're being treated unfairly. That is when our maturity is actually tested. Ross acts as a mirror for those exact uncomfortable human moments that we all experience. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, powerful thought. Ross Geller repeatedly shows us that you can have all the facts in the world and still fundamentally misunderstand the situation. You can win an argument on a technicality and still completely damage a relationship. So ask yourself this, in your own conflicts, are you fighting to win the case? Or are you fighting to heal the connection? Because the next time you find yourself wanting to shout, "We were on a break," you might want to stop and ask yourself what you're actually trying to protect. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning how you handle your own emotional gaps.